So, in today's episode, what we're going to be doing is that we are going to be retorquing the cylinder heads. We're going to be checking our valve clearances and adjusting them as necessary. And also, what we're going to be doing is that we are going to be tightening up the exhaust, and we're going to be rectifying a few leaks as well as lagging the exhaust. For those of you who don't know, this engine has only just started about a week ago after a rebuild, and after bedding it in, it's ran for about 13 hours. The piston rings are, I'd say they're pretty much bedded in. So we're just going to retorque the heads and do a bit of post-bedding in maintenance. And in an ideal world, yes, you would do an oil change, but it's not run for that long, and the price of oil these days means that I could probably try and see if I can extend it for a slight bit longer. So, without further ado, I am going to be removing these rocker covers, and in this video you're going to actually be seeing me do more with the work myself, because obviously during the interior rebuild videos we've only been just able to show the end results, and that is just because we've been all hands on deck, and means that we couldn't get much of the actual cutting and stuff like that going on. So we're going to take these rocker covers off first. And then we're going to start by torquing the heads again. But yeah, as in regards to the interior rebuild, not much has been going on to date so far. We're basically going to be stripping out the other half of the boat soon, and we're going to be putting more side battens in place. But we're not going to be doing that quite just yet, because just waiting on a few more bits, and then that will recommence. So I'm just using a 7/16 spanner to take these rocker covers off, and we can retorque our heads. That's one rocker cover removed. And keep our rocker cover gaskets, because they can live another day. And this is our second rocker cover, which is a bit tight. Might see if I can get a bit of persuasion going on. The microphone is on. Video is on. This one's pretty tight. This one doesn't want to come off. There we go. Keep that rocker cover gasket as well. So, rocker covers are removed. So, obviously it's been nicely lubricated at the top end, which is good to see. Our capillary tubes are still in place, which is really good. So, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to consult the manual, because I do have the engine manual for this. Let me just grab it real quick. You will have to excuse some of the background noise going on, because they're doing some hedge trimming going on. So upon consulting the manual, we are going to check our torque figures. So apologies for that. So the hedge trimmers have just come past, and a wobble box has just come past as well. So I've got the engine manual here, and so basically it stipulates that you do this after 25 hours, but we've run this engine for about 13 hours, and it says here that our cylinder head nuts are 7/16 UNF, which are torque tightened to 50 foot-pounds, and I have got the torque wrench set up to 50 foot-pounds, and that's locked in place. I don't actually have a 7/16 crow's foot, so I will be using an 18mm crow's foot because that is the nearest one available to us. So what I think I should do first is that I'm just going to be removing these capillary oil tubes temporarily so that we can... Oh no, I realised I didn't need to do that, sorry. Because that keeps your rocker shaft in place. So I'm just going to start by torque tightening our cylinder head here. Okay. So what I'm doing is that I'm doing a process called sequential torque tightening. So because basically the cylinder head is on a sealing surface, we want the torque of the cylinder head to be on evenly to avoid it being ajar, and so we can have a perfect level surface. So that's why I am torque tightening in opposite corners. Okay, so that's our first cylinder head torque retorque. Okay, so that is the cylinder head now retorqued. Okay, so I've just got the manual ready for the valve clearances here, and basically the SR basically has aluminium push rods, and some versions can have steel push rods. So we are just going to clarify this by using a magnetic tip of a screwdriver to check if the push rods are ferrous. So obviously, because this is sticking to our push rods, that indicates we have steel push rods. And in this instance, the valve clearances for the inlet valve is 8 thou, and the clearance for the exhaust valve is 10 thou. So I'm just going to be I've also checked the rockers as well, and they are all in the closed positions, which is quite fortunate, because the manual actually stipulates that you take the cylinder head off to bar the engine over, which we've just torqued, and you need a starting handle to basically bar this over because it doesn't have a hex for a spanner or anything. So just going to get the spanner set up real quick and get the lock nut off. So I've got the feeler gauge already set up for our said clearances. So what I'm doing now is that I am loosening off the adjusters for the tappet clearances, and I'm holding the screwdriver on there so our clearance doesn't get changed. So we're loosening the lock nut, and this is an exhaust valve. So we have 10 thou of clearance. I'm just going to be checking if that fits. So that needs to be closed up a little bit. So because there's actually a little bit of free play. And then I put that screwdriver Apologies for that, I just had to find my screwdriver. So we have got our feeler gauge to 1/4 mil. Take that underneath our tappet, and we just want to feel it, so it's just slightly pinching it. Now there's a bit more free play on this one, so we're just going to be tightening up our screw to lower the valve clearance a little bit. So that is just pinching on there. So that's quite good. So I'm going to tighten this valve back up, and I'm going to keep the screwdriver on the actual threaded bit, just so that we can't move it at all. And then I'm going to readjust our lock nut accordingly. Tighten our lock nut, and then we can do the same on all our other valves. And we'll do the same for our inlet valve on this cylinder head here. Okay, so we've got our feeler gauge for 8 thou or 0.20 of a mil. I'm just going to do the same again, and that has a little bit more clearance than this. Is the same as our exhaust valve, so you set that down a little bit so it slightly pinches on our feeler gauge. So that's quite good, so we can keep that on there. Keeping our screwdriver to keep the threaded part in the same position, and then we do the same again by putting our locking screw back in. And also what I'm going to do is that while I've just tightened up the lock nuts, I'm just going to double check that our valve clearance still remains in tolerance. So that's good, and that's good as well. And then we're going to be repeating this process for the next cylinder head. I keep picking up the posi drive screwdriver by accident. So again, this is an exhaust valve again, so 10 thou clearance. And same again there, so that's quite a bit of free play and not much friction. So we're just going to be setting that so there's just a slight pinch, and so we can still get the feeler gauge in, but not too much where it crimps it or we can't get it in. So that's pinching it ever so slightly. That's good. And then we just tighten this one back up. And I've just moved it. our screw in the same place, and then we will tighten our lock nut. And then after we've done this, we are going to be checking the valve clearances again, and then we can move on to our exhaust. There we go. There we go. Same again on here. And we're going to be cracking our lock nut off. Oh, that's on tight. There we go. So keep that on. Loosen our lock nut off. And again, this is an inlet valve, so 8 thou clearance. And yeah, there's plenty of wiggle room in there, so we are going to be tightening that inlet valve back up. There you go, slight pinch. So now we can tighten that lock screw up, and then we can check all 4 of our valves to ensure that they are still within tolerance. Okay, so let's just check our valve clearances again after we've put our lock nuts back in. So that's a little bit tight, so that'll need doing. That's a bit of a pinch on there. That's a good one on this one. And that's pinching on there too. So I'm just going to readjust these valves real quick, and then see you in a bit. So what I've just done off camera is that I have sealed the exhaust flanges and also the bottom of the muffler box to hopefully seal it. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be relagging our exhaust Now, for those of you who don't know, fiberglass lagging is used for a heat shield to prevent hot surfaces touching the exhaust becoming potentially flammable, and basically just contains the exhaust heat, and it is a mandatory requirement on the boat safety certificate. So off camera as well, I've also just cut these sections out and inevitably dropped one of them in the bilge, because these things happen. So because I've already lagged our exhaust manifold, just because it makes it a little bit easier to put it on. We're going to start by starting here, and then we're going to be basically overlapping the existing lagging. Like so. Pulling it nice and tight. And now that that section has started off, we're just going to be lock wiring it to retain it in place. So I will do that real quick. So I like to lock wire it as soon as I put a section on, just to keep it nice and tight, so I'm not having to fiddle around with it later. Tighten up our lock wire, first of all by hand, and then we'll just use a normal set of pliers. You can use locking pliers to do this, but I prefer using regular pliers just for a bit more dexterity and control. Okay, so now that's on nice and tight, we're going to be lagging the rest of this section. Being careful not to drop any exhaust lagging material in the bilge, making sure that's nice and tight. Going over our exhaust flange. There we go. So it's just like applying a bandage really. So you want it to overlap nice and evenly. So I've already dropped this section in the bilge, hence why this is a bit discoloured. So, there we go. There we go. There we go. So that's our first piece of lagging on. I'm just going to lock wire this, and then I will be continuing doing the rest of the exhaust. So I've pre-cut some sections of lagging already in preparation for this. There you go. So that's our first section lagged. I'm going to be continuing lagging the rest of the exhaust off camera just to save a little bit of time. So we're back. I've just managed to lag the rest of the exhaust sections out, and so yeah, that should all be good. So what I've also forgot to mention as well is that I put a few lock wires in where the exhaust lagging feels a little bit loose. It is slightly discoloured only for the fact that some bits were dropped in the bilge. But if you like this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe, because it helps the channel out massively. There'll be a lot more canal and rail engineering content in the future, and there might also be some cruising videos on the way, so stay tuned.